Chances are, if you play video games or even know about them, you know about Space Invaders or have seen elements of it at some point. Ingrained into gaming culture in biblical ways, to say the very least, the original 1978 arcade game has become iconic in ways that were likely never envisioned 35 years ago. Space Invaders' inherent popularity obviously contributed to dozens of updates, sequels, and spin-offs, and somewhere in the middle of it all, it landed on the PC Engine, which is where we're picking up. Being the first Japanese arcade game to see release in North America, it's no small wonder that Space Invaders is as prolific as it is. Despite this, some of the most interesting Space Invaders have never shown up on North American shores, as Space Invaders Fukkatsu no Hi, or Day of Resurrection, has come to prove.
Space Invaders Fukkatsu no Hi stands apart from the many basic games in the series and makes a name for itself among Invaders greats such as Space Invaders 91 on the Genesis and the arcade-only parody-style Space Invaders 95. Not only does it include a color port of the original Space Invaders, but also the slick Space Invaders Plus, which is clearly the main draw.
But with so many games in the series, including modern heavy hitters like Space Invaders Extreme and Infinity Gene, is Fukkatsu no Hi even worth your time? Let's take a closer look. We all know how the original Space Invaders plays, and given its more or less omniscient presence in gaming culture, not much should need to be said of the original game, and the basic core rules apply to Plus as well. For those of you out there who have somehow managed to avoid the 1978 original or the many others of its ilk, here's the skinny. You can move your laser cannon left or right to shoot, one shot at a time, at the moving waves of ever-approaching invaders, and the occasional bonus UFO.
As you eradicate the alien present, your opposition will begin to move faster and become harder to hit. Meanwhile, the invaders will fire back as well. If you can't stop even one of the invaders from getting to the bottom of the screen, you're dead.
Bearing these rules in mind, there are some pretty big differences in the Plus version. For one, the control has been refined quite a bit, allowing for a much more fluid feeling game, despite only being able to move left and right. Whether you're controlling the tank or the space fighter, the movement rate feels pretty good. Each of these ships have slightly different fire though. The space fighter has a much narrower shot than the tank.
Next up is the stage flow. Each stage is broken up into multiple, progressively closer waves. When completed, a new stage is accessed with its own set of invader waves. However, which stage you'll take on next depends on your performance overall, including your score and remaining shield strength. These new stages typically don't have any cover to hide behind in contrast to the original Space Invaders. But there are some neat twists, like small patches of indestructible cover, and some stages granting only a very narrow cone of vision.
Difficulty has a pretty sharp curve a few stages in, but there are some neat tricks to even the odds. Downing UFO motherships will typically net you a bonus, but if you can nail them dead center, they will drop an ability. These abilities range from defensive shields and time stops to incredibly powerful offensive weaponry. In addition, additional shield power can also be dropped, which supplements what is basically your life stock.
Other gameplay enhancements include knockback when hit instead of outright dying to keep the action moving, alternate invader movement patterns, and extra credits when you clear a stage. Additionally, using a credit will allow you to start at the most recent invader wave you face rather than the start of the stage. In the endgame, you can see which of the 7 stages you continued at, and how many times you did. All in all, pretty good stuff for a Space Invaders game from 1990.
The scoring here is pretty simple. Each invader type has a corresponding score attached to it, and UFOs can be shot for additional points. The more you shoot, the more you score. Simple. However, the Plus version takes things a bit further.
When you fire at the invaders on screen, your score will vary depending where you hit them. You'll get a smaller score if you clip them on their sides than if you're able to hit them straight on, which is indicated with visual cues. This makes for a much more tactical game of Space Invaders score-wise.
Presentation-wise, Fukkatsu no Hi is pretty nifty. Having a color version of the original game was a nice touch, even if the sound is a bit off compared to the 1978 arcade version. But the Plus version is where all the real goodness is. Things start off fairly awesomely with a neat intro sequence featuring 3D vector graphics and a decent attract mode.
The game's visuals are also very strong, with a great many varying, colorful, and often quite cool backdrops with multiple different invader types. So far, we've found at least 12 different backdrops, though there are surely more. There are also some pretty subtle details here too, such as your tank leaving treads on the ground. The invaders even have different kill sprites depending where they get hit.
There's also a great bump in the sound as well, though the OST here isn't exactly anything special. On the whole, the soundtrack isn't especially catchy or mind-blowing, fitting though it may be. There is still the odd standout tune though.
The sound effects themselves do the job fairly well though, and nothing comes across as too annoying, all things considered. So, how does Space Invaders Fukkatsu no Hi stack up? Let's take a look.
Fukkatsu no Hi refines the stiff control of Space Invaders into a smoother gameplay experience.
An option to speed up your ship would have been nice, but otherwise it felt a bit sluggish. Still better than the original though.
Getting a 1cc here can be a bit tricky, but with a bit of luck it's totally doable.
It's not too tough at first, but things get pretty tricky later on. It's also pretty frustrating at times.
With the 7-stage set, Fukkatsu no Hi still manages to be pretty short, though the many different stages beg for repeat plays.
It's not especially long, so it's pretty good for pick-up and play sessions.
The graphics are fairly impressive with 3D vectoring and subtle details linked to hit detection and player movement.
This is definitely a step above what Space Invaders looked like in 1978. While the invaders looked somewhat different, they still sort of look samey throughout the game.
Fukkatsu no Hi's sound is not especially fantastic, yet it is kind of fitting. Slightly boring, but never really annoying.
I also found the sound to be fairly generic and mostly forgettable.
There's a lot to Fukkatsu no Hi that makes this a pretty great version of Space Invaders, though overall it can become a tiny bit boring despite the new weapons and fancy visuals.
This is still Space Invaders. There are better games today that do more with the series.
Space Invaders Fukkatsu no Hi is a solid gameplay experience that isn't a bad place for classic gaming enthusiasts to get some new kicks, especially with its Japan-only release. But shooting veterans may only get a limited amount of playtime with this one, despite the many surprise stage backdrops. Space Invaders Fukkatsu no Hi gets a 3.5 out of 5. There is still one great thing that this game has going for it. It's incredibly affordable. I got my copy for only $5, and it's commonly under $10 brand new. However, like all HuCard games, it is region locked. But if you have a PC Engine and if this game has piqued your interest, at least it won't ding your wallet if you're curious to check it out.